Well, good afternoon, everyone. First, on highways, we're moving toward finishing here in the Senate a multi-year highway bill, and the good news is the House, as you may have heard, has decided to process in early September a multi-year highway bill of their own, and that will lead to a conference between the Senate and House multi-year highway bills and hopefully a conference report. In the meantime, the House is going to send over to us a highway extension to October 29th, which will also include some important veterans funds to deal with a shortfall in the veterans health care system. So that'll come over to us before the House leaves. On the issue of these horrendous videos that we've seen with the discussions from Planned Parenthood people, we have a working group chaired by Senator Joni Ernst that'll be meeting later today, and it's our plan to have a vote on proceeding to a measure that they support sometime before we break for the August recess.
I know after there was a lot of skepticism about what the House's intentions were after the Senate passes a multi-year highway bill, I joined the majority leader in saying that we're pleased that they seem to agree with us that a multi-year highway bill is important. I would just point out that in fast-growing states like mine, like the state of Texas, there's a lot of need, as there is across the country, but in particular, those who are concerned about the border, as we are in Texas, obviously being a border state. This provides necessary funds and infrastructure in order to make sure that our ports of entry operate appropriately. This is the first line of defense when it comes to importation of illegal drugs and other illegal activity, but also to facilitate legitimate commerce that creates and supports a lot of jobs here in the United States. So I'm more optimistic now than I've been that we will actually get to this goal of a multi-year highway bill. It's good for Texas, it's good for the border, and it's good for the country.
Let me just say that Senate Republicans continue to move an agenda that's good for the American people. We've now had Congress has moved over 60 bills passed, 25 of which have been signed into law by the President. And as for getting the process opened up and moving again, in all of 2014, there were 15 votes on roll call votes on amendments in the United States Senate. And this year to date, we've had over 160 roll call votes. So we are following up on our commitment to work on things that are important to the American people, to allow the people's voices to be heard through the amendment process. And the multi-year highway bill is just the latest example of that. I worked on the commerce section of that. It has a lot of safety and regulatory provisions in it. We heard from members on both sides of the aisle, incorporated the best ideas into that title, and are looking at ways in which we can move freight more efficiently across this country, because we know that it's good for the economy and it's good for jobs. And so I also am encouraged that what we're hearing, the signals are being sent by the House of Representatives that they want to work with us on a multi-year highway bill. But remember, that probably would not have happened had it not been for the Senate doing its work and moving forward on a multi-year bill. And I think eventually we'll get something hopefully across the finish line and get it signed into law. And that's good for the American people.
With regard to Iran, last week the President sent his negotiators to Congress to discuss the deal, to promote the deal. Regrettably, the President first sent the deal to the United Nations before he did to the elected representatives of the United States. So while the President may want to play hardball with the elected representatives of the American people, he's certainly played softball with Iran for a long time. The President says it's this deal or it's war. That's absolutely false. To me, this seems to be much more about the President's political legacy than it does about national security. I believe the American people deserve the truth with regard to inspections, verifying those inspections, accountability. But if you read the fine print, what the fine print basically said is trust Iran. I don't trust Iran. The Senate is going to be holding hearings this week, two in the Foreign Relations Committee one in the Armed Services Committee, about the deal, the impact on military stability in the Middle East, about what happens with relief of sanctions, and if the deal actually does stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. The American people want a world that is safe, stable, and secure for us and our allies. This deal does not seem to provide that.
Well, as many of us have said before, you can't build roads and bridges 6 months at a time or even 2 years at a time. And the House and Senate both agreeing on a structure that we need to move forward with a long-term highway bill. We need to move forward with a highway bill that allows us to maximize our money and then to maximize the economic opportunities that a good transportation system provides for you. You know, in my state, in Missouri, if you look at a highway map of America or a railroad map of America or a river map of America, everything sort of comes together right where I live. And if you utilize that in the right way, it's a huge advantage. If you don't use it in the right way, just lots of big obstacles. You know, we've got the number 2 and number 3 railroad hubs in the country in Kansas City and St. Louis. The Mississippi River, I believe, is about to become more important as an avenue of commerce than it's been in 100 years. But if you can't get to it when you get on it, or you can't get to it in an effective way, it becomes an obstacle rather than an opportunity. These short-term plans that short-term highway bills have led us to believe have really stood in the way of the kind of progress we could make. There are lots of things out there that easily can come together with energy, with manufacturing, with agriculture, but only with a transportation system that works. And if we can add to what will hopefully be the last short-term extension in a long time, some things that clarify where we are on veterans, on more choices for veterans, on veterans that don't have to be bound by those choices by a facility that's maybe within 40 miles of where they live but doesn't do what they need to have done. Those are going to be big improvements in what the Congress thought we were clearly directing the Veterans Administration to do last year, but the Veterans Administration's looked for every possible obstacle to put in the way of competing with others to see who can best provide services to veterans. Hopefully that'll be part of a package that comes together here quickly and the kind of thing we ought to do for veterans, just like we can then approach what we ought to be doing for transportation.
Yeah.
If I understand correctly, you had Rule 14 that ran all bill dealing with Planned Parenthood, and you're now talking about at least working group. Does that mean they might come up with other great?
Yeah, we have a group. Yeah, good question. We have a working group that includes Rand Paul and Joni Ernst, and they're meeting in my office this afternoon to see if we can have a meeting of the minds of the best way to craft a measure to deal with these horrendous videos that we've all been viewing on various shows.
Senator Hall,
Yeah.
there are lots and lots of proposals, of course, on different aspects of criminal justice reform, sentencing reform, drug policy, and lots of other things. What is the rough timeline for coalescing all these different proposals into legislation? Is that something between Labor Day and Christmas? How do you see that happening?
Yeah, is John, you still here, Cornyn? Yeah, let me let Senator Cornyn, who's involved in that, talk about it, and then we'll talk about timing.
Well, this is one of the other areas where there seems to be broad bipartisan support for criminal justice reform. I've been working with Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island on prison reform, and there's obviously been a lot of work for Senator Lee, Senator Durbin, and others on sentencing reform. We've had a working group that I think has come up with a package that's acceptable to Senator Grassley, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and my hope is we'll have a hearing and perhaps even a markup as early as next week on that topic. But this seems to be another area where there's a lot of common ground, where a lot needs to be done, and I'm reassured by the bipartisan support we've seen and optimistic that we can get something important done.
On the timing issue, as all of you have witnessed, it takes a long time to do things in the Senate. So the first step, obviously, is for there to be a meeting of the minds, for there to be pretty broad bipartisan support, so that I would have some optimism that if I devoted floor time to it, we could actually get to the finish line. So it's just not quite ready yet. We'll be waiting to see whether all those disparate pieces come together.
Did you tell Senator Cruz that there was no special deal on the export link at the time he signed on the floor?
What about the Ex-Im bag?
Did you tell Senator Cruz that there was no deal on the export-import bank?
I've discussed the matter quite publicly with all of you on the floor of the Senate, on my colleagues all along. I don't know what one considers the definition of a deal, but we have been discussing quite openly for months that I would make it possible for the supporters of the Ex-Im Bank, I'm not one of them, but it's pretty obvious that there were well over 60 senators on a bipartisan basis who were interested in having that vote. And I also suggested on multiple occasions, including during the trade discussion, that the highway bill would be a logical place for the vote to occur, and it did.
What gives you any confidence that you'll be able to reach a conference agreement on the highway bills when the House and Senate still seem to have very different ideas over how to pay for this?
Yeah, well, the good news is the House of Representatives, as a result of our passing a multi-year bill, now feel they should pass a multi-year bill. That's a good first step. And when they do that in September, we'll follow the regular order. We'll have a conference. We'll try to work out the differences, and we'll try to agree to how to pay for it. That's the way it normally works around here.
But they've advanced repatriation as a way to do that, and you have said you don't think that is the way.
Well, look, I think the territorial tax issue is important and ought to be considered, particularly if it's an emergency and contributing, as I think it is, to inversions. If it's an emergency, we ought to deal with it. I'm skeptical that that can be shoehorned in to a multi-year highway bill by the end of the year. But if it's an emergency, we ought to deal with it. We ought to bring it up freestanding and deal with the emergency if we're continuing to lose businesses as a result of it.
Senator O'Connell, when will the Senate take up the short-term extension?
Well, we'll see when we get it and see how quickly we can take it up. Okay, thanks, everybody.